Did you ever realize that the Bible actually mentions gods other than Yahweh? It might sound surprising at first, but there are passages in Scripture that suggest the story is more complex than most of us have been taught. Imagine this. Before Yahweh became the sole God worshipped by Israel, he might have been involved in a cosmic battle against other divine beings. What I'm about to share could completely change how you see the Bible and its narrative. This isn't the kind of stuff you learn in Sunday school or hear in most sermons. Throughout the Bible, especially in the Old Testament, there are hints that ancient beliefs weren't strictly about one God alone. The idea of monotheism as we understand it today was still evolving. Take Psalm 82, for example, where Yahweh acts as a judge over other gods. Or think about the plagues in Egypt, which some interpret as a showdown between Yahweh and Egypt's gods. These details reveal a larger, more mysterious story behind the monotheistic faith many accept as absolute truth. So why don't we talk about these verses more often? Why are they usually overlooked? That's exactly what we're going to dive into. By the end of this video, your understanding of God, the Bible, and faith history might be deeply altered. Now, picture humanity's history filled with invisible struggles, not just wars between nations, but battles fought by gods competing for supremacy. Today, Yahweh is seen as the one true God. But what if it wasn't always this clear-cut? What if the Bible and other ancient sources record a time when Yahweh had to prove his power by overcoming rival deities? This idea might challenge what you've heard before, but there's archaeological, historical, and biblical evidence that raises some pretty big questions. We'll take a journey back to the Canaanite pantheon, where Yahweh is listed alongside other gods, and explore stories in the Scriptures that aren't just about physical conflicts but spiritual wars. We'll look at rarely discussed passages, ancient texts outside the Bible, the work of scholars, and even archaeological finds that show a world where multiple gods were worshipped alongside Yahweh. And it doesn't stop there. We'll explore how this divine war might have been key in transforming henotheism, the worship of a primary god among many, into the strict monotheism that emerged later. Prepare to rethink everything you thought you knew about the origins of God and the spiritual battles behind the scenes. Did Yahweh literally destroy other gods? Or are these stories symbolic, illustrating his moral and spiritual supremacy? The Bible hides messages and symbols that, when viewed through the lens of ancient history, tell a very different story than what's commonly taught. If you've ever wondered why the Bible refers to gods in the plural at times, or why religious traditions often stay silent on this, you're in the right place. In this video, we'll uncover these mysteries and analyze stories that could challenge the foundation of your beliefs. And I want you to join the conversation. Share your thoughts in the comments. Do you think Yahweh has always been the only God? Or is there more to this divine saga? Don't go anywhere because we're just getting started exploring this heavenly conflict, the Canaanite gods, and the evidence suggesting Yahweh's rise involved direct battles with other deities. What does all this mean for millions of believers today? Let's dive into this mystery together. And now, I want to hear from you. What do you think about the idea of a divine war? Have you ever stopped to consider that the Bible might be talking about other gods besides Yahweh? Drop your thoughts below. Your perspective could open new doors for others curious about these secrets. Your voice matters if we're going to keep exploring deep, revealing topics like this. If this content has made you think or sparked your curiosity about biblical history, please hit the like button. That helps more people find this kind of content and shows platforms like YouTube it's valuable. And if you're not subscribed yet, now's the perfect time to do it. Click subscribe and turn on notifications because we've got many more fascinating discoveries coming your way. You won't want to miss them. So again, tell me, do you believe Yahweh has always been the only God? Or do you think there's a hidden story behind this divine battle? I'll be reading and responding to your comments because it's through discussion that we deepen our understanding. Then share this video with friends who love digging into biblical mysteries. Remember, originally, there wasn't just one sovereign God, but a whole pantheon, a council of gods, each ruling over different aspects of nature and life. Yahweh wasn't initially the only God, but one powerful deity among many, who eventually claimed supreme status. The Canaanite pantheon is a crucial starting point to grasp the religious mindset of that era. They believed in a high god named El, the father of gods and men, along with other gods like Bel, the storm and fertility god, and Asherah, a mother goddess linked to life and abundance. These gods formed a divine council, a spiritual hierarchy with specific roles for each deity. It's fascinating to see how this worldview influenced biblical stories. Yahweh emerges as a divine warrior, a God who asserts his dominance to secure exclusive worship for his people. Meanwhile, the Canaanites, Egyptians, and Mesopotamians worshipped multiple gods in their grand temples, while Israel's faith was evolving. Yahweh's worship began as devotion to a tribal protector, not yet a universal God. That's why, throughout the Old Testament, you find moments where Yahweh seems to confront other gods directly. Take the 10 plagues of Egypt, for example. Many scholars see them as symbolic strikes against the gods of Egypt. Each plague seemed to challenge a particular deity, like Hapi, the god of the Nile, who was humiliated when the river's waters turned to blood. This background raises an important question. How did Yahweh go from being one God among many to the sole, supreme deity worshipped by Israel? This transformation didn't happen overnight. It was a slow process, told through stories that emphasize Yahweh's dominance. The ancient texts seem determined to show that Yahweh wasn't just another God, but the victor who defeated all rivals, proving his power to neighboring nations and peoples. This idea of a divine war becomes even clearer when we look at passages like Psalm 82, where a council of gods gathers, and Yahweh acts as judge, declaring the downfall of the others. This raises some provocative questions. Were these other gods just symbolic representations of earthly powers? Or did they represent something more real? In the ancient world, neighboring cultures related to their gods very differently. In Egypt, for example, there were hundreds of gods, each connected to natural forces or elements of daily life. In Mesopotamia, gods like Marduk and Ishtar ruled over great cities and were honored as protectors of their civilizations. These gods weren't distant figures. They lived amid disputes, alliances, and covenants, forming almost a divine society. It's fascinating to notice that the Old Testament sometimes echoes this worldview by describing Yahweh as a warrior God commanding heavenly armies and enforcing his will through power. While surrounding peoples accepted many gods as a given, Israel's religion gradually developed a revolutionary idea that there is only one true God. But this wasn't immediate. Looking at older biblical texts, it's clear there was at least an implicit acknowledgement of other deities. Over time, however, those gods were marginalized, dismissed as false idols lacking real power. The message grew stronger. Yahweh was not only Israel's God, but the only one worthy of worship throughout the universe. Understanding this historical backdrop is key to grasping the spiritual conflict hinted at throughout the Bible. When you read about Yahweh tearing down altars to other gods or demanding exclusive loyalty, you get the sense that a much bigger struggle was unfolding behind the scenes, one of spiritual supremacy. This isn't just about faith. It's about Yahweh proving that no other name can compare to his. And that raises an intriguing modern question. Does this ancient divine battle still influence the spiritual world today? If you've heard of the Canaanite pantheon before, or if this idea that Yahweh was once one God among many is new to you. Leave a comment. I want to hear your thoughts on this divine conflict. If you're eager to see how this evolved into the monotheism we know today, stick around. We'll dive even deeper, examining biblical stories and passages that reveal this spiritual war in ways many people have never noticed. Don't go anywhere. What's coming next will deepen your curiosity about the real story behind the God we recognize now. Talking about the Canaanite pantheon opens a window into a fascinating and mysterious world that could completely change how we understand biblical history. Imagine a time when the idea of a single, all-powerful God hadn't yet taken hold. Each city, region, and tribe had their own gods, real, powerful beings with distinct personalities and roles. Among the Canaanites, the god El held the highest position. Seen as the father of gods and men, El was the creator and head of the divine council, respected by all other gods. Alongside El were other important deities: Baal, the storm, fertility, and war god; Asherah, the mother goddess connected to life and prosperity; Anat, a fierce goddess associated with war and vengeance; and Astarte, linked to love and fertility. This divine family engaged in stories filled with rivalries and alliances. It's within this spiritual landscape that Yahweh first appears, not yet as the one true God, but as a powerful figure striving to assert his authority. Some scholars suggest Yahweh began as a desert god tied to storms and fire, a warrior deity worshipped by nomadic tribes. Over time, his influence grew until he became Israel's exclusive god. But this rise wasn't peaceful or quiet. Biblical narratives depict Yahweh in constant conflict with Baal, trying to eliminate competition and secure his people's loyalty. Baal was one of the Canaanites' most revered gods, credited with bringing rain, fertility, and protection, but also feared as a warrior. The Bible records clashes between Yahweh and Baal, signaling a real power struggle not only in the spiritual realm but also within the hearts of Israel's people, who often strayed and worshipped other gods. Prophets repeatedly warned against idolatry, calling Israel back to Yahweh's faithfulness. Could these stories be reflecting an actual battle for supremacy? Another deity often mentioned is Asherah, the mother goddess worshipped on many altars. Archaeological findings even suggest that in early Israel, Yahweh was sometimes linked with Asherah as his consort, a fact that many religious traditions tend to avoid discussing. This points to a time when Israelite faith might have included syncretism, blending Yahweh worship with other local practices. This raises a profound question. Was the image of God we know today shaped through centuries of conflicts and religious reforms? It's striking to imagine this ancient spiritual battleground, where Yahweh's followers were commanded to destroy idols and altars dedicated to rival gods. This shows that Yahweh demanded not only exclusive worship, but the total eradication of competing divine figures. This isn't just a metaphor. It reflects a real historical and spiritual journey where Yahweh emerges not as one God among many, but as the one who triumphs, takes control, and establishes his ultimate authority. Think about the story on Mount Carmel, where the prophet Elijah challenges the prophets of Baal to see which god will send fire from heaven. The scene is striking. Yahweh powerfully and unmistakably defeats Baal right before everyone's eyes. But did Yahweh really have to defeat other gods to become the only God? Or were these stories symbolic ways to show the people who truly deserved their worship? That's a question worth pondering as we dig deeper into these mysteries. The Bible does seem to acknowledge the existence of other gods at times, but clearly none could stand against Yahweh. Psalm 82 is a great example. It depicts a divine council where Yahweh stands above the rest, judging and declaring their failure. This often overlooked passage reveals a spiritual drama where Yahweh's supremacy is not only claimed but earned. Here's where it gets even more fascinating. While gods like Baal, El, and Asherah each had their own roles in the Canaanite pantheon, Yahweh sets himself apart as the God who holds all powers, ruler of nature, weather, war, and life itself. Unlike other gods limited to specific functions, Yahweh claims to be the Lord over everything, the creator of heaven and earth, a position no other deity held in quite the same way. This is a key reason why worship of Yahweh eventually became exclusive. When Yahweh reveals himself as all-powerful and eternal, there's no room left for any other gods. Now, I want to hear from you. Do you think Yahweh might have started as just one God among many, and through history, proved his supremacy until he became the only one? If you believe this divine conflict represents the victory of the true God over all others, type Yahweh is incomparable in the comments. This topic sparks intense debates, and your voice is essential as we explore these revelations together. Don't go anywhere. Next, we'll dive even deeper into biblical passages that talk about these spiritual battles, revealing details most people have never noticed. When you look closely at the biblical text, you find verses that challenge the idea that absolute monotheism existed from the very start. Psalm 82, for instance, invites bold reflection. It talks about God standing in the divine assembly. He judges among the gods. Have you ever stopped to consider what that means? The Bible describes a scene where Yahweh is part of a council of gods, but he not only attends, he judges and rebukes them, asserting his supreme authority. It's like a celestial courtroom where Yahweh makes it clear that even though others are called gods, none compare to him. This psalm is intriguing because it implies that the ancient people saw these deities as real beings. Yahweh doesn't deny their existence, but places them firmly in their place, basically saying, they might be worshipped by other peoples, but before me, they are powerless. This challenges the simple notion that Israel always believed in just one God. Instead, the Old Testament shows a spiritual and theological evolution, a battle to establish Yahweh as the only Lord worthy of worship. Think about it. Why would God need to judge other gods if they were nothing but meaningless ideas? This question reminds us that the Bible contains many layers and that there may be deeper symbolic messages waiting to be uncovered. Another powerful passage is Exodus 12:12, where during the story of the Egyptian plagues, Yahweh says he will execute judgment against all the gods of Egypt. Isn't it striking that he uses this exact phrase? It means the plagues weren't just physical punishments against Egypt. They were a direct challenge to its gods. Each plague can be seen as a spiritual attack, showing that Yahweh doesn't just rule creation but is superior to any rival deity. When the Nile turns to blood, it's a statement that Hapi, the Nile god, is powerless before Yahweh. When locusts descend and darkness falls, it declares that no god of nature or harvest can defy him. Deuteronomy 32:8-9 adds another layer. It talks about God dividing the nations, giving them to the sons of God, while Yahweh keeps Israel as his special inheritance. This suggests a divine council where Yahweh is supreme among other divine beings who govern different peoples. What does this mean? Could it be that Yahweh is recognized as the top God, but acknowledges the existence of other spiritual entities ruling over other nations? This idea may be uncomfortable for some traditions, but the text is clear, and it invites us to think. Put these passages together, and a pattern emerges. The Bible doesn't deny other gods existed. It tells the story of Yahweh's rise as the one who conquers all rivals. He destroys their altars, shames idols, and proves through signs and miracles that no one else compares. This theme of divine supremacy weaves through the entire Old Testament. The struggle for exclusive worship, The people's loyalty to the belief that Yahweh isn't just another God, but the one and only worthy of devotion, is a theme that still resonates today. It's fascinating to wonder, when the ancient Israelites heard about the plagues in Egypt or the divine council described in Psalm 82, did they see these stories as symbolic lessons about spiritual power, or did they understand them as real battles between gods? This question remains open and invites us to dig deeper, offering richer ways to interpret these ancient texts. It also helps explain why the prophets constantly warned against idolatry. When Israel's people built altars to Baal or Asherah, it wasn't just a religious mistake. It was almost like betraying their side in a spiritual war. It was giving honor to gods who had already been defeated by Yahweh. That's why texts like Deuteronomy 6:14 say, "Do not follow other gods, the gods of the peoples around you." The message is unmistakable. Yahweh is supreme, and worshiping anyone else is a direct challenge to his authority. If this topic is shaking up some of your deepest beliefs, that's exactly the point. We're here to spark reflection and bring to light what lies beneath the surface of the Bible, things few dare to talk about openly. You may never have heard anyone say that the Bible actually acknowledges other gods, and that revelation alone is worth pondering. So, what do you think? Were these gods real, or were they just symbols for political or spiritual forces? If you want to join this investigation, drop a comment with the phrase, "I want to understand more about the divine council." What's coming next might surprise you even more. There are biblical passages that show Yahweh's supremacy wasn't simply accepted. It was won through a series of clear power struggles. Don't go away. Over the next few minutes, we'll uncover mysteries that shape not only Israel's history, but also how millions around the world see God today. Take the plagues of Egypt, for instance. These aren't just stories about freeing the Hebrew people from slavery. They're a spiritual battle, a dramatic showdown where Yahweh proves his superiority over every Egyptian god. Each plague wasn't a random punishment. It was a targeted strike against Egypt's deities, exposing their weakness right in front of Pharaoh and his people. It's as if Yahweh was declaring, "There is no other like me. The gods you worship are powerless before me." This perspective changes everything. The first plague, turning the Nile's waters into blood, directly attacks Hapi, the god of the river and life itself for Egypt. The Nile was sacred, its yearly floods seen as a divine blessing. By turning its waters to blood, Yahweh stripped Egypt of its lifeline and shattered Hapi's reputation. Next came the frogs, once symbols of fertility and birth linked to the goddess Hecate. Instead of bringing life, they became a plague of chaos, showing that even the fertility goddess couldn't control the invasion. Each subsequent plague targeted another deity. Lice challenged Geb, the earth god. Swarms of flies humiliated Khepri, the scarab god. The death of livestock struck Hathor and Apis, gods of cattle and prosperity. None could protect what they ruled over. Perhaps the most humiliating was the 3 days of total darkness, a direct challenge to Ra, the sun god, one of Egypt's most powerful deities. For the Egyptians, Ra represented life, order, and light. To see him powerless was unimaginable, a clear message that even the sun itself bows to Yahweh. And finally, the death of the firstborn wasn't just a national tragedy. It was an attack on Pharaoh himself, who was seen as a living god. Yahweh made it clear that not even Pharaoh's divine status could stand against him. Looking at all these plagues together, it's obvious they weren't random disasters, but a carefully planned campaign to show the world who the true Lord is. Yahweh told his people, "I alone deserve your trust. Idols and foreign gods hold no power. I am who I am, and no one can challenge me." This wasn't just a display of power. It was a pivotal moment in humanity's spiritual history. a moment when the God of Israel revealed himself before one of the world's greatest empires. Now think about your own life. How often do we encounter modern idols, people, things, or ideas that take a place of power in our minds and hearts? The story of the plagues challenges us to ask, what really deserves our worship? Just as Yahweh defeated the gods of Egypt, shouldn't we also let him break down the false gods we sometimes put in charge of our lives? Think about it. Have you ever caught yourself trusting something more than God? If so, drop a comment below with the words, "No God is greater than Yahweh." If this story of the plagues got you thinking about Yahweh's absolute sovereignty, that's just the beginning. Coming up, we'll dive into other Bible passages where Yahweh shows not only raw power, but spiritual authority beyond what we can fully grasp. We'll explore how this divine battle plays out in different stories, revealing hidden truths that can completely change how you read the Bible. Don't go anywhere. There's still a lot to uncover. The next part will blow your mind with the scale of this spiritual warfare. Take Psalm 82, one of the most mysterious and thought-provoking chapters in the entire Bible. It presents a scene that challenges many traditional ideas about spirituality and the concept of one all-powerful God. Right from the start, it says, "God stands in the divine assembly. He judges among the gods." Just that phrase alone should make you pause and ask, who are these gods? What is this divine assembly? Are we looking at a heavenly council where Yahweh, the God of Israel, acts as the supreme judge over other deities? This image is powerful, and it opens the door to interpretations rarely discussed openly in churches or conservative circles. In Psalm 82, Yahweh rebukes these beings, saying, "How long will you defend the unjust and show partiality to the wicked?" This suggests that these gods, or whatever they represent, had some authority, maybe even over nations, but failed to govern justly. Then Yahweh declares their fate. You will die like mere mortals. Even though they're called gods, they are mortal and far beneath Yahweh. This is a powerful statement. No matter what other divine beings exist, none can compare to Yahweh's ultimate rule. He's not just on top, he is the top. Everything else falls under his authority. Over centuries, scholars have debated what Psalm 82 really means. Some say these gods are really human rulers, kings or judges, since they held power over people's lives. But this explanation doesn't fully capture the tone, which points to something far greater than just earthly leaders. Others argue the psalm refers to actual divine beings, like the gods worshipped in ancient Canaan and Mesopotamia. These spiritual beings might be powerful, but they're still created and subject to Yahweh's will. And interestingly, this idea of a divine council shows up elsewhere in the Bible. For instance, in the book of Job, there's a scene where the sons of God gather before Yahweh, and Satan is among them. It's a similar structure. Yahweh is the judge, and others are his servants or subordinates. But unlike Job, Psalm 82 shows Yahweh condemning these gods harshly, saying, "You have failed. You are unworthy of being called gods." This passage invites us to think about how the belief in one supreme God developed over time. It's like the text captures a moment when Yahweh's authority over all other gods was being firmly established. The message is clear. There is no room for any other divine name. I am the only one. This fits perfectly with what we've seen so far. The divine wars where Yahweh defeated the gods of Egypt and claimed exclusive worship from Israel. On a deeper level, Psalm 82 also symbolizes the eternal battle between light and darkness, justice and corruption. Yahweh, as the supreme judge, condemns these false gods and reminds us that true power lies not in titles or appearances, but in righteousness, truth, and justice. This is a wake-up call for us to examine the modern idols in our own lives. things or people we sometimes put above God. How often do we trust in fragile, powerless things, just like the gods Yahweh judged? Take a moment and think about that. Have you ever read Psalm 82 from this perspective? Have you noticed how it depicts Yahweh's firm judgment on other spiritual beings? If you believe Yahweh is the supreme judge who alone stands above all visible and invisible powers, comment below with, "Yahweh is the supreme judge." This passage, when truly understood, changes how we see the relationship between God and other spiritual forces. It opens a window to a far more complex spiritual world than many imagine. And here's where things get even more interesting. If Yahweh is the judge of gods, standing in a heavenly council declaring who's really in charge, we need to pay close attention to what follows. In upcoming passages, we'll uncover more evidence of this power struggle, this fight for spiritual supremacy, where Yahweh makes it clear there's no room for any other name to rival his. This leads us to question how these spiritual battles shape the faith we hold today, and how the belief in one absolute God was gradually solidified. If you're ready to continue this journey, buckle up. What's ahead will expand your understanding of Yahweh's power and majesty even further. Looking back at Israel's spiritual history, it's clear that monotheism didn't appear fully formed overnight. It took a long process and a stage known as henotheism before Yahweh was recognized as the one incomparable God. Henotheism is the belief in one main God who is superior to all others, without denying that other deities exist. In many parts of the Old Testament, especially the oldest texts, we see signs of this belief. The people of Israel recognized that other nations worship different gods, but they were called to serve Yahweh alone, as part of an exclusive covenant. This wasn't yet the pure monotheism we know today, but a strong devotion to one God who had to be placed above every other name. The journey from henotheism to monotheism is closely tied to the history of the Hebrew people. Imagine living surrounded by cultures that worshipped a whole pantheon of gods, each with magnificent temples, elaborate rituals, and deep-rooted traditions. Egyptians, Babylonians, Assyrians, and Canaanites all had their own sets of gods, each responsible for different aspects of life. For many Israelites, these gods were tempting. The Bible often tells us how the people were led astray, building altars to Baal, Asherah, and others. This ongoing struggle to keep Israel's faithfulness shows that the idea of worshiping only one God was still developing in the hearts and minds of the people. Yahweh needed to be seen not just as the God of the covenant, but as the one and only true God, the Lord of heaven and earth. This is where the prophets play a crucial role. Figures like Elijah, Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Hosea weren't just messengers. They were fierce defenders of faith, confronting pagan worship and calling Israel back to Yahweh. Remember Elijah's showdown on Mount Carmel? That event wasn't just a human contest. It was a spiritual battle between Yahweh and Baal to prove who was the true God. When fire fell from heaven and consumed the offering, it was clear to all that Yahweh was alive, powerful, and far above any other god. Isaiah took it even further, declaring Yahweh as the sole creator of everything. His words still echo today, "I am the Lord, and there is no other. Apart from me, there is no God." Isaiah 45:5. This statement marked a turning point in the move toward absolute monotheism. It was no longer about putting Yahweh first among many gods, but recognizing that no other gods truly existed. All idols were nothing more than human-made objects, wood, stone, or simply human inventions. This powerful message, repeated by prophets over centuries, gradually shaped Israel's mindset, pushing out any place for other gods. But this was no easy journey. Israel faced many spiritual crises. Idolatry was often tied to political alliances and marriages with foreigners, which brought other gods and rituals into the land. The exile, especially the Babylonian captivity, was a pivotal moment. Away from their homeland, without a temple or sacrifices, the people had to rethink who God really was. Many scholars believe it was during this exile that the idea of one God, the creator of the universe and Lord of all peoples, became firmly established. Yahweh was no longer just Israel's God. He was the only true God. The prophets were essential in this transformation. They didn't just preach. They challenged the religious and political powers of their day. Jeremiah condemned false gods and prophets who misled the people, constantly reminding everyone that salvation and justice come only from Yahweh. Hosea used the metaphor of an unfaithful marriage to show how Israel betrayed Yahweh by chasing after other gods. These tough, impactful messages help future generations understand there was no room for idols. When you look at history, you realize the shift from henotheism to full monotheism was really a spiritual battle fought in the hearts of the people. Every rebellion, every return to idolatry was a fight for Yahweh's exclusive place. The monotheism we know today is the result of this silent but intense struggle woven throughout Scripture. The message is clear. There is no other God, no other name, no other power beyond the one true Lord. This history invites us to reflect on our own lives. Are we still living a kind of modern henotheism, putting money, fame, status, addictions, or unhealthy relationships in the place of God? These things can become gods that compete for space in our hearts. The prophet's message remains just as relevant now. We must choose who rules our hearts. That's why these ancient stories still have power and teach us today. Have you heard before that Israel once went through a phase of henotheism? What do you think about this spiritual transformation? From Yahweh as the God of a single people to being recognized as the only true God. If you believe this evolution shows the strength and truth of Yahweh, comment below with "Yahweh is unique." Stay with me, because next we'll dig deeper into historical and spiritual evidence showing how this exclusive worship developed over time. What comes next might even change how you see the Bible and the history of faith. When we talk about the development of faith in Yahweh, we can't ignore archaeological discoveries. Excavations in ancient Israel and Judah have uncovered inscriptions, artifacts, and altars suggesting that, at certain times, worship of Yahweh coexisted with worship of other gods, especially Asherah. These findings challenge our traditional ideas about the history of Yahweh worship. Was belief in Yahweh as the one true God something immediate and unquestioned? Or was it a gradual process, shaped by spiritual and cultural struggles over centuries? One of the most debated and intriguing archaeological finds is an inscription that clearly reads, "Yahweh and his Asherah." This phrase, found on pottery shards at sites like Kuntilet Ajrud and Kirbet el-Qam, has sparked heated discussions among scholars, theologians, and archaeologists. For many, it suggests that, long ago, there was some kind of association between Yahweh and the goddess Asherah, who, in some Canaanite traditions, was regarded as a mother goddess linked to fertility and life. Of course, this challenges the well-established idea of strict monotheism. Yet, we can't simply dismiss these inscriptions since they were created by people who identified as worshippers of Yahweh. What might this tell us about the spiritual mindset of that time? Perhaps it means that before Yahweh was fully recognized as the one and only God, his worship went through a period of differentiation and separation from other cults. Isn't it fascinating that these archaeological discoveries help us piece together a timeline of spiritual development? While the Bible records the prophet's fierce opposition to idolatry, physical evidence confirms that this spiritual battle was very real and left tangible traces in history. Altars dedicated jointly to Yahweh and Asherah have been uncovered, suggesting that many Israelites may have practiced a combined worship, something the prophets strongly opposed. Think about Elijah's fiery challenge or Jeremiah's stern warnings. They repeatedly called on the people to abandon any syncretism or mixed faith. Each inscription like this stands as proof that monotheism didn't appear fully formed, but was shaped through centuries of conflict, teaching, and often the destruction of practices seen as misguided. Additionally, other artifacts, such as small statues and idols found in ancient Israelite homes, point to the common practice of domestic worship. Families often had personal altars and protective symbols, including small female figurines that might be linked to Asherah. This highlights how difficult it must have been to maintain exclusive worship of Yahweh, especially surrounded by neighboring cultures with elaborate rituals. The cultural and religious pressures were immense. This blending of beliefs shows that the move toward pure monotheism demanded perseverance, spiritual discipline, and the relentless voices of the prophets. Looking honestly at these findings reveals that the story of faith in Yahweh is far richer and more complex than a simple, "It has always been this way." It was a process forged through centuries of struggle against older traditions. Every artifact and inscription is a piece of the puzzle, showing us the clash between polytheistic worldviews and the gradual revelation of one sovereign, absolute God. Importantly, many of these findings don't contradict the Bible. They actually support its narrative, showing that the Israelites often drifted from true worship and needed prophetic calls to return. When prophets denounced idolatry, they weren't just speaking metaphorically. They were confronting real practices. The inscriptions mentioning Yahweh and his Asherah serve as physical proof of this reality. This makes the argument even stronger that Yahweh demanded exclusive worship and over time demonstrated that no other name or image could rival his power. Now, I want you to reflect with me. If archaeological evidence shows that Yahweh was at times worshipped alongside other deities, doesn't that also prove he ultimately stood out and overcame these false beliefs? Doesn't this confirm that despite spiritual confusion, the truth about Yahweh has always prevailed? If you agree, write in the comments, "Yahweh's truth prevails." But this is just the beginning. These inscriptions and artifacts are only part of the bigger story. Other discoveries, including ancient texts and stone tablets, reveal Yahweh's name invoked in contexts of war, victory, and protection. Each mention reinforces that even in a polytheistic environment, Yahweh was recognized as a warrior God, one who acts, intervenes, and is present. This helps explain why the people were commanded to destroy rival idols and altars. It was essential to prove there could be no comparison. If you've been following and feel the power of these revelations, share your thoughts. Do you think these archaeological discoveries strengthen or weaken faith? For me, they serve as historical reminders that Yahweh has always been greater, even when people tried to put him on equal footing with idols. Comment: Yahweh is eternal. If you see these findings as proof of the true God's victory over competing beliefs, and get ready, our journey doesn't end here. What's coming next is a deeper exploration of how these historical and spiritual discoveries connect to the Bible's message and what they mean for us today. We'll continue uncovering how Yahweh emerged as the unique God amidst a sea of false gods, and how this truth still resonates. When we turn to apocryphal and non-canonical writings, we enter a realm filled with mystery and curiosity, and for many, controversy. The word apocryphal means hidden or secret, and it's no accident that many of these texts contain information that challenges the traditional story we know. Some of these writings mention other gods, describe spiritual battles, and present a worldview quite different from the canonical scriptures. Here we reach one of the most provocative questions. Why were certain books accepted as inspired scripture, while others were excluded or even censored? Were they left out simply because they didn't fit the developing theology? Or might they hold insights that could radically change how we understand the history of faith? A classic example is the collection of Deuterocanonical books and ancient writings like the Book of Enoch, the Book of Jubilees, and the Apocalypse of Abraham. The Book of Enoch, for instance, tells of heavenly beings called the Watchers, angels who descended to earth and mingled with humans, creating a hybrid race known as the Nephilim. While Genesis 6 briefly mentions this story, Enoch provides much more detail about the spiritual realm and a cosmic war between divine forces. Some scholars believe certain books were excluded from the Bible because their views on angels and spiritual beings were considered too controversial or confusing for shaping mainstream theology. Yet these texts offer valuable insight into how ancient cultures understood the spiritual world and Yahweh's role among other divine forces. Another fascinating source is the Dead Sea Scrolls found at Qumran. Among these ancient manuscripts are fragments describing a cosmic battle between the children of light and the children of darkness. This supports the idea of a grand spiritual conflict where Yahweh is engaged in warfare against other supernatural beings. This ties directly into the concept of a divine council and other gods mentioned in Scripture. Isn't it intriguing to think that some of this material was sidelined precisely because it challenged a straightforward, controlled narrative of faith? Archaeological discoveries reveal that early theological beliefs were far more diverse than many realize. The process of forming the biblical canon also raises questions about historical influence and control. The Bible as we know it wasn't handed down as a single perfect book from above. It was compiled over centuries through intense debates about what belonged in Scripture and what didn't. It's almost like there was a kind of spiritual editorial board deciding which writings would be remembered and which would be forgotten. Could it be that some texts openly referencing other gods were excluded simply because they didn't fit the emerging story of absolute monotheism? This question still puzzles many. Then there are Gnostic texts like the Gospel of Thomas and the Gospel of Philip. Though written later and often viewed skeptically, they offer very different interpretations of divine realities, sometimes hinting at struggles between lesser deities and a supreme God. While many scholars see these as heretical or unreliable, they nevertheless provide alternative views on the spirit world and early Christian understandings of God's relationship with creation. All these issues of selection and exclusion lead us to a bigger question. Was the history of faith also shaped by human agendas? Did religious leaders and political powers decide which stories to preserve and which to silence? This doesn't diminish the Bible's importance, but invites us to approach it with curiosity and a critical eye. It's as if centuries of silence have hidden a richer history, one that helps us better understand the spiritual journey of God's people. If we look back at Jewish tradition and early Christianity, we find countless texts, now called apocryphal or pseudepigraphal, that dealt with angels, gods, spiritual battles, and cosmic mysteries. Not all of these writings were considered inspired, but they reflect the beliefs and debates of their times, showing that faith wasn't developed as a neat, straightforward story. That alone is fascinating. Now, take a moment and ask yourself, have you ever wondered why so many books were removed from the Bible? Have you imagined what secrets about Yahweh's spiritual battles and supremacy might be uncovered if we had access to all these ancient writings? If you want to explore these hidden texts further, leave a comment saying, "I want to know the hidden books." I'd love to hear your thoughts because it's this exchange of ideas that makes our study so rewarding. Stay with me, because next we'll dig even deeper into how both biblical and extra-biblical narratives reveal the scope of the spiritual war Yahweh fought to establish himself as the one true God. What's coming will deepen your understanding of how this story was told and what might still be hidden between the lines. When we consider everything we've discussed so far, the old pantheons, spiritual battles, archaeological findings, and apocryphal texts, it becomes clear that the theological and spiritual implications challenge the simple idea of God's uniqueness. For many, the thought that Yahweh once stood among other gods is almost unthinkable, because we've been taught He's always been the one undisputed, absolute God. But diving into the older layers of scripture and history reveals a far more complex story full of conflict and transformation. This complexity doesn't lessen Yahweh's greatness. In fact, it highlights His sovereignty, how He overcame every rival belief and revealed Himself as the true Lord of all. This view can profoundly affect contemporary Christian faith by encouraging us to look beyond surface-level beliefs and approach the Bible and history with fresh eyes. We're not questioning faith itself, but seeking to understand the context in which God's message was revealed. When we realize Yahweh had to assert His exclusivity in a world filled with many gods, we see monotheism as a deliberate, purposeful message. There is no other God but Him. All other gods are human inventions, false spirits, or symbols of earthly power. This invites us to see the Bible not as a closed, isolated book, but as a living text engaging with the real world of its time. The impact of this perspective on faith is profound. It calls us to rethink God as not only unique, but revealed through a long dynamic process. For some, this idea is uncomfortable. It suggests there was a time when Yahweh shared space with other gods. But doesn't that make His ultimate victory even more remarkable? Imagine Him rising in a world dominated by polytheism, proving through signs, miracles, and judgment that no other God could compare. This stands as a powerful testimony to His strength and authenticity. Let's remember, the God we serve today didn't win hearts and minds through brute force alone, but through His righteousness, power, and steadfast love. One important insight from this reflection is about idolatry. History shows that the people of Israel often strayed, worshiping other gods, even after witnessing Yahweh's mighty acts. This is deeply symbolic because it mirrors our own human nature. How many times do we put other things, money, power, pleasure, status, ahead of what really matters? When we grasp the spiritual battle Yahweh fought to become the center of His people's faith, it becomes clear why it's so crucial to keep our worship pure, not divided by modern-day idols. This lesson remains just as relevant today as it was thousands of years ago. Theologically, this also broadens how we see God's revelation. It's not just about Him being the only God. It's about how He revealed Himself over time. The Bible shows us a God who reveals Himself step by step, through history, prophets, and powerful events like the plagues in Egypt, to demonstrate that He's unlike anything or anyone else. This understanding strengthens our faith. It shows that Christianity isn't based on abstract ideas, but on the real, tangible actions of a God who interacts with human history and spiritual realities. Reflecting on this, we come face to face with the truth. There's an ongoing spiritual war, a battle for our attention, worship, and allegiance. If Yahweh had to rise as judge and warrior to defeat false gods, He still calls us today to recognize that no one else compares to Him. And this isn't just some theological concept. It touches our daily lives, influences our choices, and shapes how we live our faith. That's why we must stay alert to the subtle traps of modern idols. These might not be carved statues or temples, but things just as powerful in their pull and just as destructive. I want to hear from you. Has this perspective challenged you? Have you ever considered that Yahweh had to assert His place as the only true God among many others? If you believe that only Yahweh is God, type those words in the comments below. If you think this story doesn't weaken but actually proves the greatness of our faith, share your thoughts. How do you feel learning about this historical and spiritual background? Does it help you understand the Bible better? Stay with me, because next we'll dive deeper into how these truths not only change our minds, but transform how we live out our spirituality. Our journey continues, and there's still so much to uncover. So far, we've explored ancient pantheons, spiritual battles, archaeological finds showing Yahweh worship alongside other deities, apocryphal writings, and profound theological insights that challenge the usual picture of a single, eternal God. Now, I want to invite you to consider something even deeper. What if all this evidence shows that Yahweh didn't just exist among other gods, but completely conquered them, proving He alone deserves worship? What does this mean for your faith today? When you realize Yahweh fought spiritual battles to claim His sovereignty, it highlights His strength and purpose for your life. If He defeated gods worshipped by entire nations, what can't He do for you? If He demonstrated His supremacy with signs and wonders that shook empires, isn't it clear He can overcome the modern gods that enslave us? Fear, doubt, materialism, selfishness, and everything that pulls us away from the truth. The Bible is a constant reminder that the spiritual war continues and that we must choose where our allegiance lies. Think about it. How many idols have taken up space in your heart? How often have you chased after things promising power, pleasure, or security, only to find they were empty promises? Yahweh's story teaches us that He refuses to share His throne because only He can give us true, abundant life. Maybe that's the core message behind this idea of a divine war. Yahweh is not one God among many. He is the only one who remains, the one who proves Himself, the one who never fails. If Yahweh truly conquered other gods, what does that mean for you today? It means you can fully trust Him. He is unchanging, undefeated, and far more than a human invention. It means our Christian faith, often criticized, is rooted in a God who has proven Himself, not just through words, but through history and real action. When we think about this, we see that our faith isn't built on empty stories or traditions, but on a living, reigning God who continues to work today. Now, I want to ask you some important questions. Have you made Yahweh the one and only God of your life? Or have you let other gods take His place? And if Yahweh has conquered all others, why do we sometimes hesitate to give Him everything? These questions might seem simple, but they carry tremendous spiritual weight. These reflections challenge us to take a hard look at our own hearts, our choices, and the way we live. Are we truly living as people who believe in one true God? Or are we just going through the motions, saying the words without really trusting in His power? I want to hear from you. Share in the comments how this moment of reflection has impacted you. Write the phrase, "I choose Yahweh." If you're ready to publicly affirm that He is the one and only God in your life, know this isn't just a comment. It's a declaration of faith, a commitment to a truth that has stood strong through centuries of trials and opposition. Also, what do you think about the idea that Yahweh really defeated other gods? Has this changed how you view biblical history or your own faith journey? Think about it. If everything we've explored about ancient pantheons, spiritual battles, and historical evidence points to Yahweh's ultimate victory, then what could possibly shake your faith? Nothing. Because He has proven to be greater than any force, any name, or any power that stands against Him. That's a truth we need to carry with us every day, especially when life gets tough, when doubts creep in, or when we face challenges. This story we're uncovering isn't just about the past, it's about today, about your life and the choices you make right now. So, I invite you to think about this. How can the story of Yahweh's victory over all other gods transform the way you live? Are you putting your trust in things that will fade away, or in the God who never changes? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I want to keep this conversation going with you. Every perspective shared enriches our dialogue and helps others reflect too. And stick around, because what's coming next will take this reflection even deeper. We'll continue connecting the dots, showing how this spiritual war isn't just history. It's alive today, shaping how we see the world and live our faith. Get ready, because the next revelations will open your eyes like never before. If you're here, it's because you're genuinely interested in these deep truths and eager to uncover more mysteries about the Bible and the spiritual battles it reveals. Before you go, hit that like button to show you're with me on this journey. It helps this message reach more people who need to hear it. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now's the perfect time. Click subscribe and ring the bell so you don't miss any future videos full of powerful insights like today's. I want to know who's been here with me all the way through, so comment below with "I follow Yahweh," so I can see you're part of this special group committed to seeking deep understanding. Oh, and don't leave just yet. A new video is already waiting for you on the screen. Click on it now, and let's keep exploring this incredible journey together.